Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Lancool 2 mesh. And I need to kind of stress about the mesh because there are a few different versions of this case, mainly with a different front panel. So the mesh version just gives you higher airflow. They do it in white and black, and they both come in non-RGB and RGB versions. And you can get the non-RGB version like this from just $74.99. Now I'll say just, but if we delve into the main meat of the review so that we can have a good look round, you'll understand why this thing for $74.99 does actually deliver quite a lot. Now, I always start at the front and the top, so I'm not going to change that, even with this squeaky tripod. Anyway, so you do get a fan controller, and there are low, medium, high, and then auto modes, and the auto connects up to the motherboard, and you can set it up to run from that part. So if you were to wire it into the System Fan 1 header, for example, you can control that through your normal motherboard fan control software, so that's quite a handy one there. The fact that you can still go manual and you can also stick it in the motherboard mode. Reset switch, power button, then you've got a combined headphone and microphone. You get a couple of USBs on the front as well. Now there is a little grommet here, and on my one there's nothing behind it, but it is the shape of a USB Type-C. Also, if we were to pull the basic magnetic mesh off the roof, it exposes a squeaky tripod. I really need to put some oil in. And then you have a plethora of different fan mounts with plenty of adjustment as well, if you were just to run one, or depending on the size of your AIO. Now you can see that there are 140mm and 120mm fan mounts. Something that I do like with this roof design is the fact that you've got an offset set of fan mounts, which means that if you want to put 120mm or 140mm based AIO in the roof, it will stagger it away from the motherboard and give you the clearance to be able to get it around your memory. But it does also have a set of central fans as well. So if you're one of those people that doesn't have an AIO and are running an air cooler like I am in the normal review build that we're using today, you can have them sat in the middle and it will look better if you're looking at it from the top and isn't all kind of off center and stuff like that. So there's plenty of options there for you. And the fact of having off center and centered fans on the same roof panel is actually something I don't think we see enough of. The actual front panel of the case pulls off quite easily, and if you have a look around the back, there is no extra dust filtering in there at all. The sides are surprisingly as well all metal. Normally with a case like this, what you'd find is the mesh was kind of glued in around the back and the sides were still plastic. And the top of this is plastic and the bottom of it is plastic where it's formed, and you've got all those extra shapes. But the wraparound for the front is all metal, and it actually makes it feel quite sturdy. And to be fair, it's quite unique to have so much metal being used. So I actually kind of like this because, like I said, normally it would just be a plastic frame with a bit of mesh shoved in the middle. Anyway, you get two 120mm fans in the front, and these spin up to 1300 RPM. And if you move those two fans up as well, you could squeeze another one in the bottom, but it does only come with the two. But again, the front of the case has support for obviously 140mm mounts, but it has support for 120mm fans as well, which will come in quite handy when we start to talk about what goes on the inside. Rear of the case, 120mm fan at the top, slotted design, so you can move the fan up and down depending on if you have an AIO in the roof or radiators in the roof or not. That fan spins at 1400 RPM. When we do the testing later on, we do turn them all on to max for one of them, so the front's will be 1300 and the rear is 1400. When we move down with a squeaky tripod, which still makes me laugh, and you get the normal 7-slot layout, and you've got the meshed section on the right hand side for the side exhaust on some graphics cards. And then down at the bottom, this is actually a bit of a weird one. Now, I know a lot of people always put their fan pointing down in the case, but it doesn't matter if you point it the other way up. This is one of the first cases in a long time which only has one set of mounts, and that means you can only point it down. And I know people are going to be like, well, that's because that's how they say it should be done. Well, it's not really. But anyway, and there is a dust filter at the bottom. You can see it's got a vented design, bit of a dust filter on it. It's actually quite easy to fit as well. I've done that a few times now, and I've not messed it up on any of the times. That's quite rare for me. When we're looking at the side of the case though, with a squeaky tripod again, I'm going to probably say that loads today, you can see you've got this lower panel here. Now when we come to the glass windows, this is obviously the glass window for the back. There's no pop mechanism or anything to be able to open the window. You have to lower the lower flap first, then put your finger underneath, then open the rear window. Now with that rear window, it's not particularly covering a lot because you do get these two upper flaps on it. And when you open the first one, this is pretty much behind where the 24 pin comes through. And then this one up here magically covers the CPU cutout. And they've also hidden behind there a fan controller. And the fan controller is on its own separate mount, so you can remove that if you want. So there's lots of stuff that you can remove on this one. Now we have a normal 160mm length power supply in the bottom, and in the front here there is a triple bay 3.5-inch hard drive mount, and it's in the furthest back point. There is a screw down the bottom and you can move it further forward if you want, and I'll show you a better view from that from the other side in a moment. And it does mean that you can run longer power supplies if you have them, or have more room for cables. I've actually gone for a worst case scenario with this one, because you'll see why in a minute when we actually look at things again. But you do get two solid state drive mounts here and two solid state drive mounts here, and you can see that they go in all the different positions. And the only thing I would say is the solid state drive mounts at the bottom would probably be better if you are running mechanical 2.5-inch hard drives, because they come with rubber grommets. And it does also make them slightly easier to fit, where you can just pull the hard drives off if you want them. The ones at the top, they have to screw in from behind is normal, but again, it's all fully removable if you don't use it. When you do pop the side cover off though, as you can see, it pretty much then hides a plethora of messy cables, which is a really nice touch, helps keep everything kind of clean. And obviously these extra plates do end up adding money, so even though it does come in at $74.99, we've still got these if you want to cover them up. It gives us modding opportunities as well, because you would be able to, if you wanted to, paint these different colours, maybe put lights on them, cover them in stickers. There's an endless amount of things that you could do with these points. And you do get a tempered glass window on the back as well. And I think it all does balance out really nicely and look really good. Round on the business side of the case though, if I move the squeaky tripod up that little bit, on the business side of the case, you do get a meshed panel on the bottom. Again, you have to remove or pull down the meshed panel at the bottom to be able to access the door. Now, right in the front of the case, straight away, there is a glorious flap, which you can, if you want, remove. And then that does give you a chance to be able to put radiators in and stuff. And when you do remove that flap, it's also a good time for me to be able to show you the hard drive mount in the bottom, and you can move it forward. There's like 6 different mounts there. You can completely remove it as well if you want, because you can still see it with the flap removed. Why might you want to remove it? Up at the front of the case, you can see there is a screw there and some different mounts, and that is because the front mount that holds the fans in can be moved both in and out, and you can also turn it around as well, so that you can get some monstrous radiators in the front should you want it, which is going to be great for those of you out there that might want to run a big single 360mm front mount radiator, or maybe a 60mm thick with push-pull fans, and if you had LED fans on the other side, that will help light up the rest of your graphics as well. And you can also see with that shot there that a standard length 980 just misses the end of where the flap is, so you should be able to get the bulk of graphics cards in there with the fat radiator and some push-pull fans as well. That's really nice. Then also in the front, what we can do is you can see that the mesh panel there below the graphics card, and they are removable. But if you were to have a big radiator in the front, so you're going to have a lower fan, you're going to need to be able to get that air out of the case, and that's going to end up being where it is. But that is also mounts for two 2.5 inch drives, so solid state drives or mechanical drives, depending on what you're using. And also you can see at the back there are large cutouts at the back, so you get plenty of room to be able to get your hard drive cables in and out as well. While we're talking about cables though, you can also see that there is a hidden cover on the other side of the case, which helps you put all of your 24 pins through, and your PCI Express cables if you're like me as well, and you still put them up the back. And that helps keep everything out of the way, all the unsightly stuff. I'm starting to prefer these to grommets now, and it does mean, because of the extra covers around the back, you can't see any daylight through, and it does just keep things that little bit tidy. I have just greased this flipping tripod up and it's still squeaking. Oh, that's a bit better. Right, so spinning the case around, we have a 120mm fan in there, and it is a Hyper 212 black, but you would be able to get a 140mm based cooler in there if you wanted. There's a fair amount of room in reality, and if I spin it round, one thing that I can't reiterate enough is there is ample airflow in this case. It's compact, but there is still plenty of routes both in and out for your cooling, and that leads us quite nicely on to our performance testing. Now, onto our performance testing, and this does require me to walk you through how we do it. And that's because we we do it the same with all of the cases, and that's why we can get some decent comparable data out. First of all, what we do is we fix our GPU fan speed at 60%, and with the CPU cooler, what we've actually got that on is a 9-volt reducer, so it's wired direct into the power supply with a 9-volt reducer on it. Basically what that then does mean is that the only thing that is going to change the temperatures of the graphics card or the CPU is the case performance, and we run the case on a 600 RPM mode, and then we're using OCCT in LinPack mode to load the CPU up, and then we do a separate one to load the GPU up, rather than running them both together, because then you've got a CPU specific load and then you've got a game specific mode. The 600 RPM though, what I will say is that is an absolute torture test, because you're running the CPU at max, or the GPU at max for that matter, but with only 600 RPM fans. So that is really going to be a test on how well the fans can move the air and how easily the air can move through the case. With such a low RPM, because there's really not going to be much CFM being pushed at that point. Then you've got a fair kind of 1000 RPM mode, which is a low end quiet kind of RPM for fans, and pretty much all the cases will be able to do that. Then we do a max RPM mode, and obviously that's going to be different on each case. Some cases are going to be 2200 RPM, some like this with the front fans are going to be 1300 RPM and the rear fan is 1400 RPM, and you'll see that pop up in the graphs. So we do that, and then that's how we test, and we do specifically different CPU and GPU ones, because if you were doing a CPU based render, it might put a little bit of load on the graphics card, but it wouldn't be a massive amount on the graphics card. And if you're playing a game, you're going to get the bulk of the gaming performance coming from your graphics card with a little bit of load going onto the CPU. There are very few games out there that will completely max the GPU, so we decided to separate ours out like that, because then depending on your intended usage, whether you're going to be using it professional, whether you're going to be using it for photo editing and video rendering and that sort of thing, or whether you're going to be mainly gaming focused, but it gives you a good way, and sometimes it can make a big difference, which is why we also sort our graphs in both CPU and then we flick them around into GPU, so it's all the same data but just presented to you in different ways, because then it puts it out in a different order. And the CPU at 1600 RPM with the Lancool actually did quite well, and it was down near the bottom of the graphs. The fact that the fans are quite close to the case actually does seem to make a little bit of difference at that low RPM. And so you can see there it went into second place, and then when you put it into the GPU test, and it goes a little bit further up the graph. Still did really well though. Well, it's a place up the graph, and to be fair, for it to be in third place in the GPU mode is pretty good, because amazingly the GPU side of things at low RPMs can be the one that properly trips up some of the cases. Moving into 1000 RPM, again third place down near the bottom, but if you look at the cases below it, there are some significant differences. The ROG Helios, which did perform quite well, had 340mm fans in the front of the case, but it's also it is actually over 3 times the price of this, and there's also a lot more room for it to breathe as well. And then when you sort the 1000 RPM into the GPU testing, you can see it gets near the better of the middle of the pack. Then when we move up to maximum, you've got the CPU, and it did okay here. It's in the healthy section. It's not particularly like bad, but the only thing that I would say is pushing past the 1000 RPM point on the fans on this didn't really do much more than create a lot of noise. So past the 1000 RPM on these fans, I would personally say it's the trade-off between the noise to the actual thermal performance that you got wasn't that great, and it sat in the same sort of place max on the GPU as well. So one of the things I would say is for fan performance on this, it probably around the 1000, maybe 1100 RPM mark would be the sweet spot for me personally between performance and then noise. You're not going to be expecting to pay $74.99 for a case like this and then have class leading fan moving air not making any noise kind of levels from it, and I think they've found the balance with it really well. But it's one of the first times that I've been able to actually say that just maxing the fans out didn't really get you anywhere, and it was quite interesting that around that 1000 RPM mark was actually kind of a sweet spot. So performance wise, I personally think it did really well. At 600 RPM, it was actually a surprising one for me, because don't forget, very low RPM case fans, but maximum load on graphics card and the CPU, or maximum load on the CPU and then a gaming-esque kind of load on your graphics card, because we don't all run Fairmark on our graphics cards for lols. Most of us, like I said, we're spanking away and playing some games. So I think that worked out kind of well with it. I personally think they have done, and we're moving on to a conclusion now, I think they have done an outstanding job with this case for the money, to the point where I'm quite surprised, and I'm starting to wonder how they are ever going to make any profit out of this case, because all of the little extras that they've added on, the fact that you've got a full metal front on it, the fact that you've got all of those removable shrouds around the back, the fact that you've got 4 solid state drives that can all be removed and moved around, 4 solid state drive mounts, and then the 2 solid state drive mounts that you can put on this side if you want to put them on show. The only thing that I would say with the solid state drives is they all require, you can't move anything between. So there you've got 2 of one, 2 of another, and then 2 round this side. They're not interchangeable at all, other than the one that it sits directly next to. I don't think that's going to matter for a lot of people, but it did mean that I had to pull the solid state drives off every time to move it somewhere else. It's only something that probably I'm going to notice, but it's worth mentioning. It's also nice that they still had a 3-bay mechanical hard drive bay in it, including all of the other solid state drive mounts. It was movable, but one of the things I will say is if you take that flap off the front of the case to put a radiator in, you are always going to see the edge of the mechanical bay unless you remove it. You can't push it any further forward, and it's always got that little bit that's going to poke out. That would annoy me. And in reality, I think it would annoy me enough that I would personally try and avoid removing that flap unless I really needed to. And if I did, I'd probably want to move the mechanicals off. But that's just me and my own OCD kind of idiotic state of things. But the long and short of it is, the $74.99, this is a cracking case. If you are looking at it though and thinking to yourself, well, I'd actually like some, like some fans in the front, maybe a little bit of light going on with it. They do for an extra £5, because this is $74.99. For $79.99, you can have 320mm RGB fans in the front. so for an extra £5. So it's kind of nice that for those of you out there that are RGB phobes and don't want any colour in your case at all, you have a cheaper option. But then it's also nice that if you do want a bit of colour in the front of your case and you want to accent certain things in, then for just an extra £5, you can add the lighting fans on. It's a completely different SKU. It's not like you've got a tick box or anything like that. And also, one of the things I would say is it does appear that the 3 fans are 120s, but I don't know because I haven't seen it. And I also don't know whether those fans perform the same as these. This was just the one that they sent me. I will say though that it is a great shame that they sent me the black one. And that's not because I am racist in any kind of way, it's just because I like white hardware and I would very much like to have seen the white version of this case. So again, it's a shame that I got this one specifically, but maybe they can try and remember for the next time, if there is a next time. But the point also to kind of take away from that is, without any price penalties, you can go and buy a white version of this case if you want as well. If you don't like the mesh, they do versions with different front panels and even a glass front panel as well. So there are 3 different front panels sorts, 2 different case colours, so that's 6 cases in general. But then once you mix the RGB versions in as well and the non-RGB versions, they've actually got quite a few SKUs out there. But none of them are wallet-rapingly expensive, which is actually a really nice touch. But I don't say the awards very often in the video reviews anymore, but this is a solid value for money award. For $74.99, it's pretty much hard to not suggest it, and it's that good. If one of my friends said, I've got 80 quid to spend on a case, what one would you say I should buy? It would definitely be this. Anyways, with a quick edit, this is the tiniest one with another video for you. Slightly late, I know, but we got there in the end. Out. Ding! Love you, sis.